your way to work tomorrow, instead of sitting around with your finger up your ass, look around. There's a union out there called AFSCME, and they're busting their balls for you doing a lot of shit work you take for granted. For example, we pick up your fucking garbage. We got broads out there who keep your kids from getting run over by some hard-on. We plug up the holes in the road so you don't fuck up your car. And we push around a lot of little old ladies from Florida. We're out there zapping rats and roaches and making sure your kids don't drink piss from the fucking water fountains. We're fucking AFSCME, Amalgamated Federalization. Hey, I don't know what the fuck it means. All I know is we're hard-working, tax-paying people like you, and we don't take shit from nobody. You got that, asshole? AFSCME, the fucking union that works for you.
Yes, folks, that is a parody ad apparently created as part of a joke reel in the 70s and passed around via VHS. I saw it on the Union Drip Twitter account. And I will just say AFSCME, that union has been going at... Oh, by the way, hello, David.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. AFSCME President Lee Saunders released the following statement as workers today protested Elon Musk's plans to target the Department of Labor. Quote, "It's not surprising that Elon Musk has ordered his Doge cronies to storm the Department of Labor next. He has always seen working people as a threat, from blatant union busting at Tesla to skyrocketing worker injuries at SpaceX. Musk views his workers as expendable. Now he has turned his attention to workers across the country." And the statement goes on. But yeah, I thought that was a good way to start today.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, as this assault, continues on, like, I don't know, basic parts of government and more largely like critical workers across the board, as we're seeing a lot of the consequences of that playing out.
And just obviously sort of contradicting the supposed surgical or technocratic expertise of Musk. When you have to rehire nuclear safety engineers back, you're not being very fucking deliberate. Pardon my French.
No, I mean, not deliberate at all. And let's also not forget that they're having difficulty finding those folks because they locked them out of their email. These are people who do critical work, with the American nuclear stockpile, which is a very frightening thing in the first place. And it's worrying enough that the two people sitting in the Oval Office right now have control over that stockpile. It's even more worrying when you realize they don't even understand the kind of basic maintenance and safety protections that we need to make sure that we're safe. I mean, look, it's an all-out assault on the country. It's an all-out assault on the working class. Part of it is ignorance, but as we talked about last week, and we did a deep dive into all of the kind of personal reasons why Musk is involved in this kind of thing. Part of it is ignorance, ideology, but it's also plenty of opportunities to make some money off of this.
Yeah, and Elon Musk, what part of his business empire is batteries for storing electricity at home. Perverse incentives when it comes to nuclear, as you can find with pretty much anything he's involving himself with. And the big fucking joke that he got to say, yeah, when there is a conflict of interest, I'll recuse myself.
Insane.
Are you kidding me?
No, I mean, a total lie. But the thing is, millions of Americans realize, that this is nonsense and are getting organized to fight back. We talked about it with Eric Blanc last week. People should go and watch that interview. We talked with Eric Blanc about worker organizing. We released it yesterday as a special episode, along with our conversation with the good folks at the Philadelphia Whole Foods Union. But there is a link that people should go and follow, which is bit.ly/SOS action, because there is a day of action planned for tomorrow, February 19th, to push back against these attacks on our services. You can find this at the Action Network. On Wednesday, February 19th, federal workers and everyday Americans are coming together to say no to Elon Musk's push to gut federal services and impose mass layoffs. You can find all across the country, as you see here, that there are actions. So go and check out that link, see if there's something near you where you can get involved to say no to this. Because not only is this assault on these kind of workers, but these are assaults on hard fought victories of our class, right? Like workers' protections. These are victories that we've won in the past. Environmental protections, all across the board. These are things that we as a public, as members of a democracy, have fought for, advocated for, and won from our government. And now one person is trying to pull all of those away. Illegally,
And
I might add too.
yep, and when you hear things like efficiency or optimization, what they mean is we're going to undo
Yeah.
any prioritization of people over profit, because fundamentally that's all they're looking for, is freeing up more cash and freeing up more sort of longitude and ability to conquer basic capitalists at the expense of just basic things like flight safety.
Yeah. No, and also let's not forget too, somebody like Musk, who has made a lot of money off of the federal government's largesse.
Continues to do
This
so.
this is an opportunity, right? The ideology of these people is not that it's not about efficiency or delivering services for people. It's how can I get my hands in the honeypot? Like that's literally what it's about, right? That's what this pillaging and breaking down of services is. That okay? Well, now there's a crisis, so we need somebody to step in, and the people who are hoping to step in are obviously people like Musk, but all of the people around him who are hoping to be able to take advantage of this mess that they're creating.
Yeah, profiteers.
Look, y'all, thank you so much for hanging out with us. It is the main show. These are every Tuesday at 6 Central, live on YouTube. They're up as a podcast shortly after. We got a lot to get to. We're going to be talking about JFK. Very, very Matt episode today, I got to say. I'm very happy to do it with you.
Yeah, I will say I did sort of steamroll our discussion with Jefferson Morley a little bit.
No, I mean I appreciated that. No, it's a really interesting conversation. I learned a lot. We'll be talking about what might be coming in some of these releases if they happen, and also just more broadly about the JFK assassination. I really took away a lot from it. I'm sure our listeners will as well.
Yeah, Morley is there's a good interview with him in Vanity Fair from a week or so
Yeah.
ago. He's very deliberate in his which is not to say to denigrate other sort of JFK researchers, but Morley goes very close to the public record. He has a good history of that, including like what documents do we want to see, as opposed to just imagining, oh, could there be a big document that says, shoot JFK in Dallas from Langley. Yeah.
No, I mean, I do appreciate that. And like, I think knowing what it is that you're looking for versus just sort of reacting to things after the fact, somebody who's engaged in that kind of work, who is doing it in that way is certainly somebody who is more trustworthy than somebody who's just sort of chasing any thread that they see. But yeah, it's a really, really interesting conversation. So that's coming up in just a little bit. But Matt, before we get there, I actually have some documents here. And I want to talk about something that is pretty worrying, which is Elon Musk's attempt to create a town for himself here in Texas. We can go into this a little bit more in depth in a second, but just really quick, wanted to sort of establish what's going on here. As people know, Elon Musk has moved to the state of Texas. He's moved many of his companies, businesses here, notably SpaceX, right? And SpaceX, we've been covering on this program for a long time because Musk didn't bring his people here, didn't bring his companies here because he is interested in Texas culture, or Texas food, or anything like that. He thinks that he can get away with more here than he could in other states, notably California, which is why we've covered very closely all the things that have happened at SpaceX, all the things that have happened here at the Tesla factory, because a lot of the things that he's been getting away with are egregious, right? Now, that's been bad enough, but ostensibly there has been a governing authority sort of over top of him, making sure that they're following the law, following local labor regulations, following local environmental regulations. And again, as you know, here, for example, in near Austin, I mean, they have just been pumping our water supply with toxic waste. Right. So there's already been a dereliction of duty, but at least there's been somebody that they have to try to get around. Musk wants to form a company town in South Texas, Matt. And I have right here, I have the application, and then we can talk a little bit about the plans here. But notably, this is the application that went in to the county for them to form a Type C municipal corporation. the city of Starbase, Texas. And in
Oh
this,
my God. Sorry.
I know, no, I mean it's terrible enough already. But in this, we have the senior manager of space port operations for Exploration Technologies Corporation, SpaceX, who has put forward um, this application on behalf of SpaceX and Elon Musk. Um, they have a spreadsheet here that contains the residential information of SpaceX employees who inhabit the Starbase, Texas community. It lists their addresses, whether they lease or own real property for their dwelling. And we'll get to that in just a second. So basically, this petition is trying to get to have an election about whether or not to incorporate. Fact of the matter is, the area that they have here. Is small enough, sparsely populated enough that it's almost certain that they're going to get this election because a lot of the people living there, not all, which is important, a lot of the people living there are SpaceX employees. Looks as this petition has been approved by Judge Eddie Trevino, there will be an election on May 3rd. Um, but I want to get into a little bit about some of the people who are living in this community, what their plans are with this community. Unless you had something you wanted to add first, Matt.
I just want to make a point. SpaceX, a large part of its revenue comes from the government, right? So
Yes, sir.
we're essentially subsidizing a private company to create a private company town with government dollars.
It might be a good way to put it. And again, let's not forget that Elon Musk has been feuding with the FAA and with the EPA, along with other government authorities, because, for example, they're just blowing rockets up just a little bit above the ground, spreading around toxic particulate, all across very important environmental areas, not to mention communities where, yes, people actually do live. Now, this has been a problem since they moved down there into Boca Chica, where Musk and his company have sort of acted like they've already owned everything before even getting this potential town. They would shut down public roads. They would tell people you have to shelter in your home hours upon hours. Oh, but don't worry. If you want to go stay at the motel, maybe they'll pay for it. But you basically don't have access to your home. You can't leave. You can't travel, right? We'll get into some of the legal issues there in just a second. But they've already sort of acted like they're the bosses of this town. There are people who live in this area who are not SpaceX employees or associated with SpaceX. I believe around 10 lots in this area. But when we're talking about the hundreds of SpaceX employees who live there, it seems very, very likely that they're going to get away with it. Now, in this petition that I have here, we have
Got the documents.
we got the documents, as Mr. Jones would say. We do have all of the people who are living in the community here, and it's really notable because you want to talk about power. I went through and I counted, and yes, only 9 people who would be living in this town, not including the people who aren't SpaceX employees. So out of all of the SpaceX employees who'd be living in this town, only 9 of them out of the hundreds own their home. The rest of them, and don't worry, y'all, this is the names and stuff are redacted. But if you look a little closely here, let's see if you can see this. It just says lease, 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 and I got pages upon pages of this. So what we're talking about is a company town that is run for the benefit of the SpaceX Corporation, where not just the vast majority, the virtual majority of people are people who are leasing their property from the company, which again, they work for. We want to talk about problems of democracy. We can get into it. I also wanted to get into some of the plans that they have for this community. And it gets us to this document right here. City of Starbase, Texas. This is officially filed in the county. The only candidate for mayor, again, who looks like very likely that they will get it upon upon this election after May 3rd, is Gunnar Milburn, who just happens to be Elon Musk's chief of security. Right? So here we are right here. You live in a town. Your boss owns your home, right? You got to rent from him. You got to follow the rules when you're at work. You got to follow the rules when you're home. And if you get into trouble, right, and you want to go and talk about maybe some of the problems that you're having in the community, I mean, I guess might as well just go to HR. But if you try to go to your elected representative, it's the head of security.
Yeah, I mean, on top of everything, stretch yourself thin a little bit. Like, you got time
Yeah.
for all the mayoral office on
That's a
top of
good
keeping
point.
track of the assassination coordinates Musk.
Well, they don't have a lot of time for anything. I mean, Milburn has gone into trouble because they don't have the appropriate licenses that they're supposed to get for the state of Texas to be operating. So it seems like they're already, as you're saying, Matt, are pretty stretched thin. He also has fancied himself to be there's court cases about this. Maybe already a representative of government because there are cases about him shutting down public roads illegally. Which, by the way, just so people know, you can't just do that, right? I can't just walk in the middle of the road and say, "Hey, we're closed today." Yet these people think they can.
No, famously, right wingers seem to have a problem with that, even to the point of encouraging vehicular
That's
homicide.
actually a very good point. So, look, this is extremely bleak. It's something that has been telegraphed for a long time. Nothing controversial, about how they went about getting these signatures. I mean, they've created the circumstances for it. But it is pointing to an extremely bleak scenario. And I want to get into the history of company towns, why there's something that people should oppose in the first place. But I just got to remind people about what it is like to work at Musk owned companies, right? As we talked about last week, we went into all of the many legal problems that his companies face because of abuses of workers, because of abuses of animals, because of abuses to the environment. But just kind of focusing on Texas for a second, remember that just up the road from me at the Tesla Gigafactory, workers died from heat exposure, right, at Musk's factories. In SpaceX, in addition to the attacks on the environment, to the attacks on the native peoples in the community, along with just the people of South Texas. Don't forget Becca Hinojosa, who we interviewed on this program, was perp walked, had her home raided early in the morning because of Facebook posts and an allegation that they had engaged in graffiti, right? Like all of those kind of abuses, but specifically SpaceX, which has cases in front of the NLRB, which, by the way, Musk is now trying to eradicate effectively. Because these employees at SpaceX were horrified when at the company, SpaceX was showing videos about the quote unquote proper way to spank an misbehaving employee, right? Which was their funny tongue in cheek way of saying, we do not care or worry about sexual assault or protections for our employees. Now, a bunch of workers got together and circulated an open letter, right? Nothing secret, to the company saying, hey, maybe this might not be the kind of thing that we want to bring to Mars, right? Which is the stated goal of your company. The people involved in that letter were subsequently fired, right, for speaking up. And the NLRB has been investigating the SpaceX sense. But just remember, this is the kind of environment for look. A lot of times when we talk about these kind of things, people, we focus a lot on workers who might not have the same access to money, to the media, right? A lot of these people working at SpaceX are like higher paid employees, right? But look what happens to them when they speak out at their company about something that's just so egregious, right? This isn't just like, oh, I don't like our overtime policies. This is, hey, yeah, please don't sexually harass me at work, right? Please treat me and my coworkers as human beings, right? You see the way that this guy is acting privately in his corporation, and you have to ask yourself, do you want this person to be given authority to pass ordinances and laws in the community? I, for one, absolutely do not.
It's so crazy. He's so clearly a power fiend
Yeah.
that, I mean, it's wild that we have a sort of subset of people who think that might be the future or something.
I mean, you want to talk about democracy for a second, saving democracy, right? Imagine what life could be like in Starbase, Texas, very, very soon. You live, right, in home owned by your company, which also is now merged and fused with the government. You go and work at a company where the boss now has the ability to try to influence and threaten organizations like the NLRB. So you better be quiet, right? At work, don't unionize, certainly, but don't complain about anything. Certainly at work, but then also in the public sphere, if you want to engage in some kind of questions, hey, maybe even like, our city services being run well? It seems like there's a lot of shit in the roads or whatever. You go and you
Yeah.
complain to the head of security, who also just so happens to be the mayor.
And what happens if there's crime or someone gets killed or something?
It is.
Ask the mayor or my head of security.
Let's get into the history a little bit, Matt, here, because I just wanted to say that, like, what oftentimes we read about company towns and you feel like, oh, that's something that happened in the past. This is a very clear example about how, one, it's alive and well today, but two, I think one thing as we get into some of the history that we're going to get into here, remember why rich people want it. Why do rich people want it and why do bosses want it? Because at work, right, we get told all the time, work is not a democracy, right? Work is a dictatorship. You have to follow the orders of your superiors, right? Well, that's something that is antithetical to any kind of concept of democracy, right? Democracy being a system where all of us as a community have equal rights under the law and are able to influence and control our own future and destiny, right? You see how there's a tension about American democracy, the land of the free, right? The land of rights, and a dictatorship at work. Everyone, socialists understand this distinction. I think we should get better at making this argument more publicly. But you also see that bosses, billionaires, the rich don't like that their power ends when you clock out at the end of the day. They want to control you in every aspect of your life, which is why rich people, moguls, oligarchs, billionaires have always tried to get away with creating company towns, right? They either do it through just bribery to the government or campaign donations, right? So that they can get influence over the governments. Or if they have the ability, why waste your time with all of that? Just have your head of security run the town that you've created and you also own all the housing and people have to rent from you.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. We have a question here from Ophiel Cross. Do you think that Musk's impetus here will blow open the gates on other industries recreating company towns? It's interesting. I mean, my first instinct is it's been proven to be not a super great model. So probably not, but also if I'm not ruling it out, and it would frankly put more in behind the thesis of techno feudalism, which I'm a little bit suspect of. But if we if we go back to widespread company towns, I'd be like, well, maybe there's something to that.
I mean, I think they certainly want to. I mean, the one argument is that, like, they do sort of have it with the government at this point, right? Both state and federal has just been completely controlled by corporate interests. So why bother with trying to run
Right.
all the services? But I think in circumstances like this, particularly if you can isolate people, for sure. But I think there's one thing that has to be noted about Musk is that he is a megalomaniac, right? And he is somebody who has a fiendish desire to have absolute control, not just of his companies, but his employees. And now we're seeing, the entire country, right? These are the ambitions of the rich. They do not like the fact that you are a free person. They want to control your life. So if they see that they have the opportunity to do this, yes. And if he is able to get away with this, I don't doubt that there will be attempts to get away with it. I mean, just think about it. I'm sure you know this in North Dakota, Matt. And I don't know New York City if there's any that I can think of off the top of my head. But here, you have these kind of like fake towns that are still sort of like they're like in Austin, but they've like left the city for some reason. And that reason
Yeah.
tends to be, hey, we're rich and we want to take advantage of city services, but we don't want to pay taxes for them. So we'll hire, a police officer, but something really bad happens, please send in your city. Anyway, like you see this, this is trying to create special legal jurisdictions for your company. I can't imagine that's not something that we'll be seeing more of in the near future as the war on democracy, continues.
Yeah, and just to clarify for a common sense, like I don't reject the techno feudalism thesis entirely. I just think I think there's surfaces and essences to some of these metaphors.
Yeah, I think why is everyone's fixation? We're getting off track here,
Right.
but I don't know why people have a problem with calling things like that capitalism and needing to use clunky historical metaphors for this point. But we're gonna have a conversation with this very soon with the guest about this very soon. So
Yep.
you'll get your wish.
Yep. And but so one major example of this historically, and folks, I don't know if you've heard, but Disney and went woke, and we got some one of the secret files that the woke people don't want you to watch anymore from Disney going back in the day, and it was Walt Disney and Henry Ford talking about Fordlandia, which is something that's been covered in a book by Greg Grandin. Here is a little bit of this documentary.
Among the present-day pioneers of the Amazon who are lighting the way for others to follow is Henry Ford. Ford's rubber development on the Tapajos River is an enterprise of historic proportion. Here, 2 million acres of jungle are being converted into a highly modernized plantation, capable of producing rubber on a large scale. Deep in the wilderness, this model community is self-sufficient in every detail. It has its own powerhouse, electric lighting, a telephone system, its own machine shop completely equipped with modern tools. There's a laboratory for processing rubber, an ice plant, and a fire department. There are non-profit stores and shops where food and clothing are sold to the employees. There's modern road building equipment, and 200 miles of roads have already been constructed through the plantation. 17,000 acres of jungle have been cleared and planted. Science and skill work hand in hand to produce the finest rubber trees possible. Ford has scoured the far corners of the Amazon as well as Asia for selected stock and uses it to build his own super rubber trees. The Ford tree is developed through a process of bud grafting. Scientific care, the watchword of the plantation, is extended to the human element too. Consistent with this policy, the 5,000 inhabitants are provided with every means of making life in the jungle healthy, happy, and comfortable. The workers' houses are clean and airy and offer a pleasant environment with modern conveniences. Families living on the plantation are highly appreciative of the advantages offered. Their children are given every opportunity to develop into healthy, happy individuals. There are 7 modern schools scattered through the plantation with a total enrollment of 1,200 children. Children of the big city may well envy these youngsters who, in a healthy rural setting, are taught the 3 R's as well as physical culture and hygiene. There's a day nursery, too, for the younger children whose mothers wish to work. Here, the youngsters are given the very best of care, including scientifically balanced meals. The best is none too good, for these are the future conquerors of the Amazon. Well,
and now I'm going to skip a little bit ahead to Greg Grandin talking about the real story behind this company.
Here they come. Nursery's over for the day, and Big Pioneer.
Oops.
Near the mouth of the river is the leading metropolis of all the Amazon's realm, the gateway city of Belém. Belém
seems to portray all of the residents as very happy with their surroundings.
You know, let me say that, you know, Ford spent about $1 billion in inflation-adjusted dollars on this project, and not one drop of latex made it into a Ford car. It was an absolute failure. And the more it failed, the more this is also a resonance with recent history. The more it failed, the more he justified it in idealistic terms. Not unlike in some ways the Iraq War. The more he failed to find weapons of mass destruction, the more it becomes a civilizational mission to bring democracy to the Middle East. The same thing with Fordlandia. There were riots, and workers rebelled against this attempt to impose Ford-style regimentation. One worker called it, resisting being turned into 365-day machines. And then, of course, the environmental aspect of it. Ford basically, by planting rubber trees so close together in the Amazon, Ford basically created a large incubator. Caterpillars and pests and blight just devastated the plantation. The more it failed, the more money that was poured into it.
So riots and environmental destruction. I think that's probably a good preview of what we can expect from this round.
Yeah, and I just add that again, like that's an extreme example, but this happened all across America, as I'm sure people are familiar with. People are probably familiar with some of the stories in like West Virginia, for example, where not only did you work at a place, you oftentimes lived in a home that was owned by the company. The company store, hey, why use American money when you can use company money? Might even be able to get a good deal. Well, that meant that it was very difficult for people to get up and leave. Oftentimes, they were basically getting paid slave wages with many minuscule subsidies at the company town to keep people kind of happy there. Abusive system. You saw this in Texas, for example, in a lot of the timber cutting areas of the state. These kind of company towns, same kind of stuff. Hey, people were getting in town. In the middle of the town square, and they're starting to talk about this radical new idea called a labor union. Hey, we better get the government, which we own because it's a company town, to shut that shit down. And you can see this actually in Texas, where in Texas and Louisiana, there is a similar region, actually, oftentimes similar companies. The same company was operating in Louisiana, Texas, and in Louisiana, where they had towns that weren't company towns, but maybe were more historical. People had roots, family, all that kind of stuff. The BTW, which is the Brotherhood of Timber Workers, had way more penetration and representation within those communities versus the company towns, because every time an organizer or somebody like that would show up in a company town, they would get chased out by the quote unquote government there, right? So like these are just beyond just like the kind of like dystopian idea. There's like a practical reality here, is that like, hey, we can shut down free speech, we can shut down democracy, we can control every aspect of your life so that it just becomes more difficult for you to ever stand up at work, and to be able to see the differences in communities that were controlled by a corporation versus controlled by the people. It's massively significant, right? Which is why these guys are pursuing this kind of thing. So look, it's more than just a kind of interesting story, annoying story. I mean, I know Musk has other plans to build these kind of towns in this area around Austin as well. These are things to watch as they are dismantling the federal government. They're also taking away your rights to engage in democracy at home. And people shouldn't sleep on these threats from the billionaire class.
And like at home, meaning like they want to own your home. They want you to pay rent to the same guy who's drawing your thing. And, like the granted, these things trend to to pry into your life more and more. You should be married with a family because that makes you a better worker for us. Like, sorry, if you don't have that, you're not who we're looking for. Like all those sorts of things. Because these are megalomaniac control freaks. Yeah. Anybody who has become this level of a titan of industry isn't someone you want in charge of your community.
No, I don't think so. Nor your country. So let's get them out. Get them out of here. Folks, let's talk about Matt. I mean, we should jump over to this JFK conversation. I mean, really fascinating. I think people are really going to enjoy it. And then don't forget, right after that, we'll be going to the postgame, patreon.com/leftreckoning, because Matt and I got two things. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the developments around Ukraine. But I'm really excited to talk with you, Matt, about this Morley crypto scam, because it's way worse.
I got in early on that. I haven't checked the price though, so
I'm sorry, dude. I'm sorry. I got some bad news for you over here. So to help Matt out after he got screwed on the crypto coin, please consider subscribing at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We'll be taking your questions, talk about this Morley story, much more over on the other side. But before that, let's get to this conversation about JFK.
Here's Jefferson Morley. Welcome, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me as ever, David Griskin. Hello, David.
Hey, Brent.
And joining us today, it's a big honor to have Jefferson Morley on, a longtime reporter, formerly at the Washington Post, currently the curator of JFK Facts on Substack, and then also on a web page, author of The Ghost, The Secret Life of CIA Spy Master James Jesus Angleton, and also most recently, Scorpion's Dance, The President, The Spy Master, and Watergate. Jefferson, thank you so much for joining us on what must be a busy week for you.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
So we have you on because you're one of the leading researchers on these JFK documents. So for folks who haven't, like me, been reading your work and the work of other researchers for a decade plus now, can you just orientate people around this current release that Trump is looking at?
So it's a complicated story. So let's just back up. We got to go back to 1992 when Oliver Stone releases his movie JFK, creates a storm of controversy challenging the official story of a lone gunman and suggesting that President Kennedy was killed by enemies in his own government. Slick, persuasive, very good cinema, and creates a lot of outrage when Stone points out in publicizing the movie that 30 years after the assassination, most of the government's records on the subject still remain secret, which was true in 1992. And so Capitol Hill was inundated with mail, and Congress responded by actually doing the right thing. They said, look, we're not going to reinvestigate the assassination, but we're going to make public all the records in the government's possession. And it was a strong law. And they did something really important, which was they took the final decision about releasing a document or deciding whether a document was JFK related. They took those decisions out of the hands of the agencies themselves and put it into an independent civilian board called the Assassination Records Review Board. And so Congress passes this law, JFK Records Act, which mandates all government records have a presumption of immediate disclosure. That's the language of the law, which is still in effect today. And the law said CIA, FBI, they can postpone release of these documents for national security or personal reasons for up to 25 years. And after that, everything is public. So everything was supposed to be public in 2017. And a few of us, not many, were saying that's what should happen. And when it didn't happen, Trump promised he would release them and then immediately broke his promise. We pointed it out, JFK Facts, the Mary Farrell Foundation, the JFK research community. And people began to pay attention because, you know, we were just dismissed as crackpots and crazy and all that. But when they blew the deadline and they still had thousands of documents, people started saying, hey, well, you know, what's that about? So Trump blew the deadline in 2017. The decision came to Biden 4 years later. He went along with the CIA in the same way. Yes, they did release some records. Both Trump and Biden did release some records, but they went along with the core demand of the CIA and the FBI that they retain control and final decisions over what became public. So, you know, going into this presidential campaign, we were 8 years past the deadline in the law. And Robert Kennedy was making an issue of it when he was running as a Democrat. He started as an online petition, and he said that he believed that the CIA had been involved in the murder of his uncle and maybe even in the murder of his father. Strong statements, to be sure. When he went over to Trump last August at a rally in Arizona, Trump said with a flourish, and we will release all the JFK records, kind of repeating a point that RFK had made, not one that Trump had made much. And Trump gets this big applause line. And it's like the biggest applause line of the rally. And so, you know, he understood, I think Trump understood that that was a good line for him. This was a popular thing. And also, Trump was a little embarrassed because even his supporters, like Andrew Napolitano and Tucker Carlson, they were giving him a hard time. Like, why did you do that? Why didn't you release these? And Trump spoke out of both sides. He had no good explanation except that Mike Pompeo had told him to do it. So he decided he didn't like Pompeo anymore, and Pompeo has been exiled from this administration. And now Trump is saying, yes, he will do it this time. And he issued a very strong order. So that's the backstory of why these things haven't come out and why Trump is jumping on it now, because it's a good issue for him. And he's got a, you know, very justifiable complaint. This stuff should have been out a long time ago.
And of course, the famous line from the Warren Commission was, "Not in your lifetime will all of this stuff be released." And it turned out to be maybe more than a lifetime.
A little bit longer than not in your lifetime. Not in two lifetimes is the thing. So it's a positive moment. But look, the CIA has been fighting disclosing this kind of stuff since the day Kennedy died. So they're not going to stop just because Trump said something. they're going to keep trying to exclude things from the record. And so we still need to see how this is going to play out. I mean, look at, Trump said, give me a plan in 2 weeks. Okay. That was February 7th. There's no plan, right? There's no documents. Like all of a sudden these deadlines are slipping again. So we're being very vigilant, hopeful, but, we know from hard experience that, this is not a done deal.
What I find really impressive about your work and the work of other researchers is kind of knowing what you're looking for. And I mean, just as sort of an introduction into that, talk about the Bay of Pigs invasion, of course, failed invasion that took place early in the Kennedy administration, and redacted documents that might be pertaining, or a redacted document that might be pertaining to that.
Yeah, so the Bay of Pigs invasion is a key formative event in Kennedy's presidency in a lot of ways. The CIA presented a plan to invade Cuba and overthrow the government of Fidel Castro, the communist socialist who had recently taken power only a year or two earlier. And the plan was a disastrous failure, and Kennedy refused to send air support, and the CIA-trained Cubans were crushed on the battlefield. The ones who weren't killed were captured. Great victory for Castro. David, he's the Latin David who beat the American Goliath, and so it's this cataclysmic event, and Kennedy's presidency is not even 100 days old. So he's mortified. He's pissed off. He felt that the CIA handed him a bad plan. They assumed he was going to go to war. He had no intention of doing that. He didn't think Cuba was important strategically. He was worried about Berlin. He was worried about the Cold War. Thought Cuba was a distraction. So after that, I mean, Kennedy was furious, and you'll frequently hear this line, he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. That was him raging after this defeat, this humiliating defeat to start his presidency. And he didn't trust the CIA after that. He didn't trust them to come up with a good plan, and he felt like they'd kind of boxed him into a corner and assumed that they were going to do what they wanted, not what he wanted. So he asked when he calmed down, he asked his aide, Arthur Schlesinger, the historian, to write him a memo about reorganizing the CIA. So he's not going to splinter it into 1,000 pieces. That's an angry man. A president says, well, let's reorganize that, okay? So just as a radical idea just expressed in the language of policy. And so Schlesinger makes the case, and the case is basically that the CIA has usurped the president's foreign policy making authority by handing these fait accomplis that the president has to go along with, and he doesn't really have a choice. And that's what he felt had happened in the Bay of Pigs. So Schlesinger writes this memo. Well, we have that memo today, except one entire page is missing. And that's a story, that's a page about what's called controlled American sources, which are basically the CIA's most highly placed spies, whose identity cannot be released under any circumstances. So that was what Kennedy was worried about, and where he thought the CIA had excessive power. So the CIA is still censoring criticism of itself from 60 years ago. So, there's a new president. If he wants to know, well, what did Kennedy go through when he was dealing with the CIA? I mean, Trump can find out. He can look under those redactions, but the American people aren't allowed to see that. So, this is the kind of petty, bizarre, if not suspicious secrecy that you see throughout these records. It's everywhere. Okay. And so This is that's one of my baseline documents. If this is serious, if they're obeying the president's order for full and complete release, which is what Trump said, full and complete, we'll get this record. If we don't get this record, the executive order is being thwarted. It's that simple. And we have developed, a group of us around the Mary Farrell Foundation have developed a list of 15 documents this is not exhaustive. These are not the most important ones. These are just the ones we think will be the most interesting. And they cover a wide variety of subjects, but, we know a lot about these records. This is not some blank slate for us. Each of these records is identified by what's called a RIF number, a record identification form. We have partially declassified versions of most of these records so we can see the context of what's being said. We have some idea of what's going to be released. So I have no doubt that when we get all of these records, we will learn significant new information about the assassination.
And one thing I would just add to that, the Schlesinger memo is Harry Truman, believe in the Washington Post a month to the day after Kennedy's assassination, had an editorial saying the CIA is getting a little bit too over ahead of us in terms of making policy, which I thought was
and it's very telling that Truman reverses himself. Truman, the man who had signed the CIA into existence in 1947, after Kennedy's assassination, he realizes something's gone very wrong, and the article that Truman wrote for the Post doesn't say anything about Kennedy's assassination, but it's obviously connected. He started writing it, we know from some internal evidence at the Truman Library, he started writing that piece on December 9th. That was the day that the FBI released its report on Kennedy's assassination, blaming the whole thing on one man. So when Truman saw that, headline, he decided to write this piece about the CIA. I mean, so draw your own conclusions, but that's exactly what happened. And it can only be because he thought the CIA might be involved in Kennedy's murder.
And so kind of the context for that is something that is a matter of public record, I believe revealed, you can correct me, from the JFK Records Act, Operation Northwoods. Am I right about that revelation? And can you tell people what Operation Northwoods was?
Yeah. Operation Northwoods was a Pentagon plan. It was first disclosed in 1997 by the Assassination Records Review Board, which found copies of the Northwoods plan in the Office of the Secretary of the Army. And it was a couple hundred pages of documents. And it's really a stunning document. And anybody who's interested in the Kennedy assassination should read it for its insight into how policymakers thought. And it's particularly how the Joint Chiefs of Staff thought. So, yeah, the idea of Northwoods was what they called, candidly, an engineered provocation or a pretext operation. They use those phrases in the planning papers. So a pretext operation is you create a pretext for war. Sometimes these are called false flag operations. But the Northwoods concept was stage a spectacular attack on an American target, like an airline hijacking or a terrorism spree or refugees shot up on a boat or John Glenn's spacecraft crashing. But whatever it was, you figure out a way to blame this event using U.S. covert personnel, blame this event on Cuba, and then that would prove that Cuba was outside the community of international law-abiding states, and that therefore the U.S. was justified in invading. And so for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, this was the preferred solution in Cuba because Castro was pretty popular. He was very strong. He had enough support. And he had, with Soviet advice, he had a very sophisticated security service. And he had control of the island. And nobody was going to challenge that. The CIA couldn't get in there and do their usual things because Castro's security forces were so efficient. So the Joint Chiefs just said, we just need to create a pretext in which it's going to go in there and invade. They didn't care about the Cuban Revolution. They just wanted to destroy it. And so Northwoods was their solution. Well, Kennedy rejected Northwoods in March 1962, very abruptly, and we have the minutes of the meeting. He told Lyman Lemnitzer, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, get lost. I'm not interested in this approach. I'm worried about Berlin. The part of the story that people forget is not often enough emphasized. In May 1963, the Joint Chiefs revived the Northwoods concept, knowing full well that Kennedy had rejected it. So the Northwoods planning gets underway in May of 1963, and Northwoods is this idea of an engineered provocation. That's Joint Chief of Staff policy for the next 4 months. And it's not replaced with a new policy until September. So on November 22nd, somebody staged a spectacular attack on an American target, and immediately CIA assets seek to lay the blame on Cuba. And so you can see Northwoods as a kind of template of the assassination. Now, how exactly that might have worked, that's imponderable. But there's no doubt that the structure of what Northwoods talked about and what happened on November 22nd look very similar. And one of the key things that we've learned in recent years, and we only learned this in 2017, the CIA itself did not believe the lone gunman theory. Okay, the week after the assassination, the president was killed. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested. He said, "I didn't do it. I'm a patsy," and then he was killed. And so you had these two crimes, shocking, bizarre. What was going on? And the White House and the FBI immediately agreed. Johnson and Hoover specifically tell aides, we have to convince the public that this one man acted alone. He had no co-conspirators. So before the investigation has begun, Johnson and Hoover have the conclusion that they want. One man alone did it. So in the week after the assassination, when they're saying that, and there are no JFK conspiracy theories anywhere, the CIA station in Miami launches its own investigation of JFK's murder. And what they do is they tell their officers, their intelligence officers in the station, go talk to your Cuban sources and ask them this set of questions. And it was basically, who had money, who was asking for guns, who traveled to Dallas, who disappeared from Miami, who might have killed the president in order to orchestrate or in order to provoke a U.S. invasion of Cuba. Exactly the scenario that was envisioned by Northwoods. That's what the CIA itself investigated. They didn't investigate Lee Harvey Oswald. They didn't investigate Castro, organized crime, KGB, none of that. Only one group they were interested in, Cuban exiles opposed to Kennedy. So that's the story that, the CIA itself didn't believe it, and they had a lot to hide. And that's why this secrecy has gone on for so long, because they have a lot to hide. And people say, oh, well, there's nothing in there. I mean, come on, it stands to reason that the most damaging thing is going to be the thing you release last, right? Because otherwise it's going to be painful. So you're going to, save that to the end or fight that to the end. And so, I could be wrong, and that's fine too. So just, if I'm wrong, full disclosure will prove it, And that's another thing why I feel like I'm right, because if I'm wrong, if this is all totally off base, they could discredit me tomorrow and just release a bunch of records that I've said are important and say, look, they're not important. There's nothing to it. That's not happening. So I feel like we're on the right track. What's the explanation for the president's death? I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not trying to prosecute somebody. The evidence tells us that the president was killed by enemies in his own government, like Harry Truman thought. It's not a crazy thought. Harry Truman thought it. Lyndon Johnson thought it, or at least said so privately. So, but what did happen? Who was it? How did they mobilize? We have a lot of insight into how the breakdown in security happened in Dallas, but not perfect by any means. There's some people who you could say are plausible suspects, but that's about all. I would hesitate to write it. It's just the evidence is not that strong against anybody. But covert operations are designed to be secret from conception to eternity, right? And CIA people do believe that you can achieve complete confidentiality in covert operations that will never be detected. And so, that may be what we're looking at in terms of Kennedy's assassination.
Yeah, and specific to Oswald, I feel like the disclosures have done the opposite of discredit researchers on the JFK assassination. The CIA is almost already confirmed to have been hiding its knowledge about Lee Harvey Oswald prior to the assassination.
Yeah,
Isn't that right?
Yeah, the testimony of John McCone and Richard Helms, the top two CIA men who testified to the Warren Commission, it's false. John McCone might not have known that he was lying. Dick Helms definitely knew that he was lying. So you start right there, right? And you say, now that we know that's true for sure, well, false government statements in a homicide case, that's ground for mistrial and a retrial. So we have to give Oswald the presumption of innocence again. I mean, just in thinking about this in any kind of rigorous way, you start there. So what did happen? Oswald said he was innocent. Okay, let's pursue that. Was he? And I think when you see all the CIA activity around Oswald from 1959 to 1963, that's definitely possible because they had enough information about him to manipulate him. They understood he wasn't a lone nut to top of people at the CIA. He was a known quantity who was of interest, who people were following and making decisions based on what he did. So what does that mean? I think we're going to learn more about that, if and when all of these documents become public.
The lone gunman theory has gotten so powerful that people even retroactively apply it to the Abe Lincoln assassination, despite there being multiple assassinations besides Lincoln on that same day.
At the first meeting of the Warren Commission, Allen Dulles, the fired director of the CIA, says, in the history of American assassinations, it's always been a lone nut. This is how he starts and somebody says, well, what about Lincoln? Right? A conspiracy to decapitate the government, to kill Lincoln and 2 other cabinet officers. Obviously a conspiracy, right? It's like, but that's how it works. And, the lone gunman theory, it's very comforting, because if you don't buy it, you're buying into a world of problems, right? Like our institutions failed massively, somebody pulled the wool over our eyes. Who was that? It's really bad once you think about it, once you come to terms with it. And so it's like, it's much easier. It's like, this crazy guy killed that guy and another crazy guy killed that first guy. So, as my friend Rex Bradford says, a little man killed a big man, get over it. That's the attitude we're supposed to have. Well, that just never washed in, public opinion. And Donald Trump took it to the bank.
Right, and it's a shame that he was ultimately the one, in my opinion, to do it. But I'm curious, your reflection as a researcher over the course of this time. I feel like it's an inspiring story of sort of grassroots and journalism, really. And I wonder how you think, now relative to maybe the late 60s when people were just starting to dig into this stuff. How would you characterize like the sort of arc that this research is arrived at?
Well, it's a citizens movement. It's not a credentialed movement, but it's very strong. It's very wide. It's very broad-based ideologically. I have 15,000 subscribers to my Substack. Very diverse ideologically. A lot of MAGA people, Christian nationalists, libertarians, good government conservatives, left-wing radicals, and then a whole bunch of kind of ordinary left liberal, yo-yos like myself, somewhere over there around in Bernie Sanders territory. So very diverse, and it never goes away. And I got interested in this in the 90s when the JFK Review Board first started. And for the first time, there was going to be actual new stuff, Like up to that point, what could you do? Like you could recycle what conspiracy theorists would do. As a journalist, I felt like I had nothing to work with. Then all of a sudden, boxes and boxes of CIA documents are pouring into the archive. So then there was something you could really sink your teeth into, and there would be stories there. And so that's what I jumped on. And when I started doing this, not pushing a conspiracy theory, and people say, Jeff, who killed Kennedy? I say, I don't know. And they say, well, come on, you've been studying for years. Everybody's got a theory. I say, I don't know. I'm stumped. I can't figure it out. It's too early to tell. And people would laugh about that. Oh, it's been, 40 years or something like that. No, if you don't have all the information, if some of the information has been falsified, if you got a lot of contradictory stories, no, it'd take a long time to figure out. And it did take a long time to figure out. But, once we got the records in the 90s, the whole assassination picture began to look very different. And the weaknesses of the official story were magnified. and deepened, and to the point where now you can just say, when I started this, I would say, maybe the single bullet theory was true. Maybe it's the least bad explanation of what happened. And then you realize, no, it's not the least bad explanation of what happened. It was a story concocted to save the lone gunman theory. And so, but it's a troubling subject because, like I said before, once you get into it, institutions failed in multiple ways. And I think, we're still trying to come to grips with that. It's interesting that and now it's happening amid this crisis in government created by Trump's, authoritarian, by Trump's coup attempt, basically. But, there's a crisis of legitimacy amidst that coup attempt. And JFK is right at the heart of that, So how it's all going to play out, I don't know.
Absolutely. Well, folks, do go to jfkfacts.org and jfkfacts.substack.com. Like I say, over 15,000 subscribers. I really can't tell you how much I appreciate your work, Jefferson. Thanks so much for your time today.
Well, Matt, thanks for having me. And, maybe we can talk again when we start to see some of this stuff and figure out what does it mean. So,
would love to.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks again for that.
Yeah, thanks for indulging me in that, folks. I think it's really an important story, actually. And I appreciate him mentioning the context for this and how it's been able to be used by, I think, people who. It's wild to see, like, how are the Democrats going to fuck this up?
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to get into. I think that beyond even actually like the mystery itself, I think like how this plays out is going to be, interesting enough on its own, right?
That's the most objective thing you can say. Like, if you go back to saying nothing really crazy happened, what you can objectively say is that the Warren Commission was a farce, and we should be treated better as adults in terms of things like evidentiary standards and stuff like that. And I don't know that we've gotten a whole lot better at looking and self-critiquing and investigating stuff. It's sort of a joke now when it says like, oh, we're going to do a task force to look into this sort of stuff. But yeah.
Well, folks, we got some interesting news. Bolsonaro is getting charged with the coup attempt in 2022. So we'll be keeping our eyes on that. That's breaking news. Also, we didn't talk about it, but Leonard Peltier is a free man, which is a really beautiful, or at least out of prison.
It was a good image to see on the timeline, him smiling into a camera. Yeah.
But folks, it's not over. We're going to go over the post game, patreon.com/leftreckoning, get access to it. We're going to talk a little bit about this Ukraine stuff. We're also going to be talking about this rug pull in Argentina. Matt's lost a lot of money on Libra. I lost a lot of money on the Hawk-Tua coin. Please help make us whole. Help us out. Matt and I keep on losing all of our money on these meme coins. You can do that over at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Hang out, ask some questions, and get access to the postgame and the bonus episodes.
Absolutely. See you over there, folks. Patreon.com/leftreckoning. Subscribe to us. Damn it.
All right. See you all in a couple minutes.